I'm here to talk about this journey that I'm on at PayPal. I don't know how many people actually read Sarah Lacey's article this past week on Pando Daily. Did anybody see that? Okay, this is a PayPal, folks. Jeez. So you should check it out because it's an interesting article. Sarah Lacey's going to be kind of hard-hitting, and she did a really great piece with us talking about how we're trying to deconstruct PayPal to reconstruct it into something that's actually good and decent. And so it's a journey that I'm on, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that tonight. I'll weave a little bit of the story of Lean UX, Node.js, JavaScript templating, and all those sort of things into this story, and kind of talk about how we're going about doing that. So I came from Netflix before I came to PayPal, and I was at Netflix for about 4 years with a small break in between. And the one thing that I learned at Netflix was we threw a lot of code away, and that's because we did a lot of testing. And you know, when you're actually a healthy organization, especially a consumer organization, you're doing a lot of testing, you're doing a lot of learning, and you're making a lot of failures. And failures are good because the failures are actually teaching you things. So the epiphany to me at Netflix was just how volatile the code really is. So often we kind of think about the maintainability, the long-term use and reuse of code, which is all very important, of course. But when you're in the consumer space and the user interface layer, which often really is the experimentation layer, you end up throwing away a lot of code. And so a big epiphany for me was that. And it doesn't take too many tests to result in lots of throwaway code. And let me just point out these four experiences here that we had at Netflix. So, a little closer, great. Is that better? Awesome. Oh, great. The guys in the back said I can finally hear him. It's awesome. So, what we did at Netflix, we launched for the PS3, and we had 4 different experiences we launched with. Initially, I had to pick with Rochelle, who was the head of design. We had to pick a winner because we were only going to do one experience. We felt like we only had enough engineering resources to do one in this 3-month window at time. So we chose this experience here. It's kind of hard to see in the back, but I can kind of explain it. It shows the box shots. It also has an ability to navigate, to go through your genres, to search, and those sort of things like that. And just from knowing what I know from design, giving users control is actually a really good thing. And in usability studies, what users would often self-report, is they wanted the ability to be able to search and browse and find movies. But one of the things you learn when you're in the consumer space, you learn that users actually self-report more aspirationally, individually, what they would like to do versus what they actually do in the aggregate as consumers, which is a lot less work and a lot less thinking, right? Especially in the consumer space, the book Don't Make Me Think, you can also think of Don't Make Me Work. Well, fortunately, we were able to actually launch 4 different experiences. And it ended up that this experience didn't win, this one didn't win, this one didn't win, but this one actually was the one that won. And this was like the dead simple interface. It gave you no ability to actually search. It gave you no ability to go through genres. It just recommended movies and threw them out there to you lazily, and you just watch something, right? So that wasn't something we could have predicted. If we had followed, the mindset of picking a winner and going through it, ramping and putting it out there, we would have missed, a better experience, at least for our consumers. Now, you could argue, we could have a discussion about whether it's really a better experience or not, right? Because there will be some of you in the crowd here who want that control and would like to do that. What we found out was that when users actually are given that control in the world of media, they spend more time looking and searching for something than actually enjoying something. And in a subscription service like Netflix, if they don't actually get value out of the system, guess what? They won't actually renew their membership, and they'll drop off, and you have less money, and you don't have a job after a while. So all those things kind of happen. So the epiphany to me that happened was we had to really design for volatility. Not just designing for one experience, not just designing for, like I'd done in the enterprise space many years before this. You spent a long time building an experience. At Netflix, if we went through in a course of a year, it's pretty easy to expect 95% of the UI code could be thrown away. That's a pretty high number. So this principle of designing for volatility really came as a kind of a shock and epiphany to me. So then, when I was considering leaving Netflix to go look for something different, the most unlikely place came knocking, and that was PayPal. And if I was to make a list of the likely places that I would have gone to after Netflix, well, the list with 100 companies probably wouldn't even had PayPal on the list, to be very frank with you and honest. Because PayPal's experience looked like something out of the 1990s. It still does to some degree right now because we're still chasing our technical debt out the door and trying to get the good experiences out. But I also had consulted for PayPal in 2010, and I had seen the silos and a lot of the antibodies that had been put in the organization to prevent innovation. Those that were very risk averse and very much an attitude of like rolling your own. Everything was roll your own. If we brought a framework in, open source framework, we would then go to work to bastardize it, so that it would take 20 days of training to learn an open source framework. Those kind of fun things like that. And also this concept of, I saw there when I came to PayPal in 2011, I saw this concept of really a disconnected delivery experience. And what I mean by that is, when you get into a lot of testing and you do a lot of continuous learning with that testing, when you deliver, you learn. And you immediately get a feedback loop, and then you do something else, you tweak it, and you learn some more. And you're in a continuous delivery model, and really you're in a continuous learning model, right? But PayPal, it would take, sometimes as long as 6 weeks to change a word on the site. Did you hear what I said? 6 weeks to change a word on the site, right? So it's kind of hard to learn when you have that long of a cycle, right? And that leads to this culture of a long shelf life where, it takes so long to get anything out the door that everybody begins to get built into their psyche, into their muscles, into everything that they basically have in their system is not about getting stuff out and learning. It's just about getting something out the door. And so the emphasis becomes more on delivery than it does on learning, which is a really big problem. The other big problem at PayPal that I knew going in, and part of the challenge of coming in, the reason I came in was I knew that their technology was pretty messed up. And technology and processes, were not geared around learning. They were geared around, really around just avoiding any kind of problem with money, with breaking the system, around risk policies, compliance policies, those sort of things like that, which didn't make for a great, innovation kind of environment. So the technology was a real problem. So now, why did I come, right? Well, I'm kind of a little bit insane, I think. I like a challenge. But I thought to myself, I started talking with people I knew that were at PayPal. I also, James Peresi was the CTO at PayPal. They had a technology, eBay, had been trying to get me to come there for a few years from Netflix. I had a lot of respect for him, and I sensed there was a little bit of a hunger, a strong hunger that was starting to develop in the organization. And there were other like-minded people who really wanted to see a change. Now, this is tricky because a lot of organizations have tried these sort of things, right? And we're still in the journey, and the vote's still out until our users and customers fully vote on this, right? But, things like AOL. I had a bunch of friends who left Yahoo and went to AOL to try to turn it around. That hasn't happened yet. Maybe it'll happen. I don't know. But it doesn't look like one of those success stories. But maybe it will be. I could be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong on that. So are you going to go spend several years of your life, trying to turn around an organization, help with that process, or should you just go somewhere else where it's a lot easier? Well, to me, I thought, if we could take something like PayPal that was being very successful, a lot of money coming in the door, and we could just, do a decent job and then get to a great job, then, Square and Stripe and all these others wouldn't have a chance. And that competition kind of drives me. And so I love the fact that Square and Stripe are out there and others that are competing with us, because that gives us a hunger and a desire. So what happened was a change started happening. In January 2012, I came in October 2011, we started fleshing out a new UI layer, and Rich is here, who's participated in that with me. And so we started working on a new UI layer that was based on JavaScript. And so up to this point, the technology stack, and I'll talk a good bit about this in a minute, the technology stack was based on Java JSP, Java Spring, and we felt like to get to that rapid experimentation, to get to the ability to change code very quickly, and to be able to collapse from prototype to production and almost make that seamless, we could lean on the power of functional programming, of dynamic programming with JavaScript, and take the power of that and really it really matches really well with our web technology, the UI side. And so we started experimenting with a new UI layer, and we chose Dust.js. I'll talk about that more in a minute, which is basically like Mustache or Handlebars or some of the other JavaScript templating languages. We chose Dust a lot because we liked having a partnership with LinkedIn on it. They were already going down this path, and we thought we could have a good partnership with another good engineering firm, and together make it a great templating language. But the other big thing that happened that was a little bit of serendipity was, it's funny because Scott Thompson left to go to Yahoo almost the same day that Doug Crockford came in from Yahoo. We did a little switcheroo there. I mean, Doug has a funny joke about the fact that neither one of them have a computer science degree or something like that. Except one told the truth about it. But anyway, so Scott left, and Scott did a lot of good things for PayPal as far as stabilizing the company, but he definitely was focused on, from the financial side of things with Visa, building much more of a financial company than a technology company, and much more risk averse. So when Scott left and went to Yahoo, John Donahoe made a real gutsy move, and he named this guy David Marcus as our president. So we'd actually acquired a company called Zong, which was a mobile payments company. And that mobile payments company David was the head of, he's the founder of. And I think the biggest company that David had led to this point was 200 people. And so he became the head of a company of 13,000 people, which is quite a change, right? But David is a serial entrepreneur. He's never led an organization like this before, which is exactly what PayPal needed. It needed somebody at the helm who understood what you could do at the lightning speed of startups and try to bring this into a big organization like PayPal. So we started putting the technology together, and then from the top, we started getting a huge amount of support. And I'll talk about what we did there by forming a Lean UX team and beginning to reinvent our checkout experience in a minute. So we've been in a transformation, from the kind of crappy stuff on the left to the nicer stuff on the right. We got a new developer services, new PayPal.com. We have new checkout experiences rolling out, new merchant experiences. Hello, Samira, who's been leading that effort for me for the on the merchant side. Some real cool experiences. And I think, Nicholas, Samira back from the Yahoo days on the Yahoo homepage, right? Yeah, it's more Yahoo blood in there, right? So here's what I was faced with from a technology perspective. There was these two legacies, well, two stacks basically. There was this C++, XML, they called it XPT, a framework. Now, I don't know how you guys, but I'm allergic to XML. I've been allergic to XML for a long time. I broke out in hives like probably late 90s when Cocoon and some of the others came along, and they wanted to build UIs with XML. And it's like, okay, I get it for WAP and stuff like that when you're trying to do lots of devices, or if you have the same UI over and over, I get that. But if you're really trying to do great experiences, XML just was never, to me, the right choice. It has solutions in other areas. But for UI, I'm very anti-bigot on that. So, just so you know my opinion. So here I come, and it's almost the whole freaking company is based on this XPT XML stack, right? So, but good news is there's a new stack, and it's Java and JSP. And I went, oh, wow, let's see, I did my first JSP framework in 96 or 97. Thought I was done with it. Then I went to Netflix and we had JSP Java there, and I held my nose and brought Struts 2 in because I didn't have much choice in 2007 to try to bring some order to chaos. But I didn't want to do another JSP framework. And so here's these two stacks. It was at least the Java stack was much better than the C++ stack. So the decision was made to move to Java and move away from C++, which of course that takes a while. And we're still paying this debt down, which is part of the reason we have a hard time getting stuff out. It's because we still have this debt here. And then, you know, then there were some really odd choices made in the Java stack. So work with me on this one, okay? So obviously, nobody on the web wants to write in HTML, right? Nobody wants to write CSS, and nobody would write JavaScript. You'd much rather write all this in Java, right? Wrong, right? Yeah. So they had actually created a framework that you would write you'd write your CSS in Java, you'd write your JavaScript in Java, you'd write your HTML in Java. I was scared. I was like, now, fortunately, Rich and some of the other folks came over from eBay and they were like, you know, there's JSP. This would actually be so they made a big incremental improvement by getting JSP in place instead of this weird framework that was, you know, meant to hide you from the complexities of HTML and CSS. Oh my God, that's pretty complex. So you couldn't do cascading. You know, who needs cascading, they would say. And closures, why would you want to do closures in JavaScript, right? So, and to write the DOM, you actually said a Java line to create a paragraph, to create, you know, the div, parent the paragraph to the div, you know, each line like that. I mean, it wasn't even, I don't like GWT, okay, GWT, just to get on my more rants, you know. But you know, GWT at least has some really sensible, you know, framework, mindset, etc. But this didn't have any of that, to put it kindly. And one team actually was building a page with this. It took them one page. It took them about 6 weeks to build a page. Wow, that's lightning fast. So this is the world we inherited, and so then we wanted to support Lean UX. So when David took over as president, the first thing he did was, I want to reinvent checkout. And a lot of it was because I literally hated our existing checkout experience, you know, coming from a startup and from a newer mindset. It just breathed all the old stuff, you know, redirect and everything else. So it was perfect serendipity because we were had already played around with Dust, got it working. One of the things we did, and I'll talk about here in a second, we got Dust where it ran on the Java stack. And so it allowed us some flexibility there. But more importantly, what we did was we were able to bring Node.js in really quickly. Well, on the first day that we sat together to do this project, we just went ahead and, you know, and we've discovered that we had GitHub internally. Santa Claus came overnight. We didn't even know that GitHub was in, nobody had advertised it, you know. They had been using ClearQuest, you know, ClearCase stuff before that, and they had actually moved to Git, but they tried to make it look like ClearCase, which is really awesome. And so we discovered that same day we had GitHub internally. We were like kids in a candy shop. We're like, this is so freaking awesome. And then so we downloaded Node, got Express, and real quickly we kind of built, you know, a scaffolding, like a more kind of a Rails kind of a little bit additions to it to make things a little easier, some additional glue. And in the first few days, we had a full checkout experience going. We found some internal APIs. We could call those. We made them, you know, where they return JSON, writing some Node modules. And so before we even got design and product involved, we actually had a working, you know, it was very limited in what it did, but at least it moved some money, you know. And so then we got design and product involved the next week. And this was really cool because we put us all in the same room. You know, and this was like, you know, you got to think about PayPal's normal operation is they would, you know, iterate on designs on something for a number of months, you know, maybe 6 months or whatever, and then it would take maybe another year to get something out. And so we just got in the room together. I mean, this is like not rocket science, guys. I think you all know this, you know, and we just put product design engineering in the same room, and we said we're going to set aside all the tools. Design's not allowed to use Azure to do its prototyping. They're not. We'll use Photoshop for our assets. That's great. You have to sketch on the whiteboard, and we'll code it in real time. And that's what we did. And so the first day, the designers, we're doing the flows and stuff, and first or second day, and Cody, was real excited about what we'd come up with together. We've been working together on this, And then he goes, well, so what do I do now? Do I put this in OmniGrapple, or should I put this in Photoshop, or what should I do with this? And Jeff Harrell on my team turns his laptop around and says, it's built, try it, And we're using Bootstrap. Bootstrap allowed us to move really fast, Twitter Bootstrap. And he was blown away. He's like, well, what's my job? Which is a big misunderstanding with design organizations, because we got so trapped into the world of design being all about documentation, about delivering documentation. And one of the strong tenets of Lean UX is that really it's about delivering experience. So we collaboratively deliver experience together instead of one team delivering documentation and throwing it over the wall to the other team. So as a forcing function, we made, at that point in time, we made it so that we didn't use the prototyping tools. We used sketching on the whiteboard. Now, we will use those now from time to time, right? And you do whatever is necessary. But we had to have a forcing function to break the mindset of the organization from having these walls and throwing things over to one another to just sit and work in the same room together. And so it made a big difference. We were able to, every week for 8 weeks, we would go to usability and be able to deliver, quickly. So what is Lean UX? Okay, if you're not familiar with it, Jeff has a great book, Jeff and Josh. But I like to boil it down to 3 principles, really. And I think if you remember these 3 principles, you can apply them to anything. And you can call it Lean UX, you can call it balanced teams, you can call it whatever you want, Lean Startup. But you have to get teams to a point of shared understanding. You have to work in a very collaborative manner. And you have to have continuous customer feedback. And if you have those 3 principles in place in any team, don't care what your methodologies are really, you're going to have a healthy team. Because the shared understanding talks about how much documentation do you really need, right? If you have teams that are distributed and remote, you're going to need more documentations, more things, more tricks, more asynchronous kind of sharing or communicating or showing your prototypes or whatever to get to that shared understanding than you would if you're all in the same room. So that flexes, I can't tell you exactly how much documentation, but I can tell you need a shared understanding. You need to be talking the same vocabulary. At Netflix, we often saw this with our design and engineering team, where we would talk about something, they would talk about something, and then after about 3 months, somebody would say, what do you actually mean by that? Have you ever experienced that? It's very common, actually, to go for a long time and actually think one person's talking one way. I remember at the start of this, Hermes experience, the checkout experience, I was talking to the design team about A/B testing. And at some point I realized the design team thought I meant that we would be A/B testing in usability. In other words, we would actually bring in like 5 users during the day. We'd give 2 of them one experience, 1 another experience, and 2 a different experience. Which makes no sense because you don't have any statistical significance to do that. And I have the background in Netflix to understand what quantitative research means versus data versus qualitative. Being like user studies or usability studies, those sort of things like that. So we got on the same page on what we meant by A/B testing, right? But it's one of those assumptions that I just assumed everybody in the team understood. But I spent 4 years at Netflix and it was just like part of my DNA. That didn't mean that they weren't clever or anything, they just didn't have that same experience. So it's really important in a team like this, you put teams together and they've never worked together like this especially, is to really get that shared understanding pretty quickly. And then, working deep collaboration across the disciplines, because what happens is we create silos in big organizations, we create specializations, and so we have to learn how to collaborate and to actually not force the ownership of a certain area. Like, if I'm in engineering, I can have input into design. I could even sketch. It's not illegal. It's actually permitted. And if I got some folks, like I had a design team in Boston just recently, and I had a little weaker than I should have had in one of the teams. Somebody in the team was not very good with CSS. I didn't know that at the time. And they were writing some pretty crappy code. So one of the designers in Boston, who's actually really good with CSS, he says, this code is crap. I said, well, dude, here's GitHub. Go for it. He goes, oh, I can I do that? I said, yeah. He said, oh, this is freaking awesome, right? So breaking down those barriers, where you don't have these silos between each other. And then the key one is keeping that continuous customer feedback. It's really not too unusual in most organizations to go a long time without talking to customers about your product. It's just actually very easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and not have that. You have to really force that issue. And so what we did there at the beginning of this was force every Thursday to be usability day, and every Friday was retrospective. We had the usability study back, and then we did our planning based on that, and then we built the experience on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday for the next Thursday usability. It created a really fast, high-paced cadence, but it got us out of the mode of things taking so long. Then what we did was we set up really what we called a Lean UX Scrum team. And Samira back here, put your hand up, Samira. Samira's been really good on pioneering that in his team and really kind of fleshing out what does a Lean UX Scrum team really mean. Because you have your Agile Scrum teams, and the Agile Scrum teams, you're giving stories, you got your backlog, you got all the sort of things like that, and they're really focused on release, following acceptance tests, having done what completeness is, having their backlog, grooming their backlog, release planning, all those things that go with Agile, right? And you're pushing out code. So the Lean UX Scrum team, what we designed it to be was not about releasing code per se, even though we ended up doing this, and I'll talk about that in a second. It was really focused on learning. To me, learning is the most important thing for the Lean UX team to be doing. It's not so much about, we're not trying to get to exact code or anything. We'll use code to help us learn, but the focus is on learning. So you actually want to experiment and try things and hopefully, actually fail and invalidate some of your assumptions. And then we put, we end up having, Scrum teams that then could take the learnings that are coming out of that Lean UX Scrum team and put that in the backlog. And I'll show in a second how we also